Hello, everyone. My name is Will Vong, and I'm a marketing program manager here at Akamai Technologies for the developer relations team. I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Effectively Understanding and Using RUM Data. Before we get started, I do want to go over a couple items with everyone here on the call. First, we do encourage you to submit your questions anytime during the presentation, and we will do our best to answer as many of them as possible during the Q&A session after the presentation. You may utilize the Q&A window to submit your questions. If anyone's having any technical issues, if your screen freezes, you all of a sudden can't hear the presentation, please also submit any issues in the Q&A window as well. And 2 lucky attendees will be winning a $100 Burton gift card today. To qualify, all you have to do is just fill out a short 2-minute survey at the end of the presentation. So today we'll be covering the following items with everyone during this presentation. We'll provide everyone with an overview of who Akamai is and what we do, an overview of what real user monitoring is. We'll be sharing a user success story from Burton Snowboards with everyone today, a Q&A session, followed by a really short survey. Remember to fill that out for your chance to win the gift card. I would also like to introduce everyone to our speakers today, Will Smithee and John Boone. Will has over 20 years of experience, let me correct myself, has over 15 years of experience with web performance, and he currently serves as a senior solutions engineer here at Akamai Technologies. John is joining us from Burton Snowboards with over 20 years of web development experience, and with the last 15 as the web development manager at Burton Snowboards. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Will.
Thanks, Will. Most of you already know that Akamai's content delivery network is one of the world's largest distributed computing platforms, responsible for serving about 1/3 of all the web traffic. This is accomplished utilizing hundreds of thousands of edge servers located all over the world. For the vast majority of internet users, our edge servers are just one network hop away. Akamai is also utilizing this vast network of servers to protect websites, providing security close to the end user, thus minimizing the impact of attacks to businesses and global networks alike. And Akamai also offers a robust real user monitoring solution called Impulse. Today, I will be discussing real user monitoring in general. In our world, there's generally 2 types of monitoring. We have synthetic and we have RUM. Synthetic is characterized by being scripted. It runs on a well-defined section of your app. It runs from well-defined locations, limited number of locations. This reduces the variability of the scenarios, which is good in some cases. It's great for instant results if you want to just check something out from a particular location. And for testing things that aren't public yet, it's really useful. That way you don't have impact on end users. Real user monitoring, on the other hand, collects data directly from the users as they access your app. And by measuring from a user's browser or app, you're able to continually test and see what performance is like in the real world. Synthetic tests can be hard to set up and configure. They only test what you can script, and they only run for a defined period of time. Whereas whenever you have RUM, you're able to test all the different combinations of browsers and OS and connection types and connection qualities. So it is definitely, they're different, and they both serve different purposes. For most scenarios, however, real user monitoring is superior. It allows you to see what is actually happening in your users, and this allows for very good alerting and reporting. The one thing that you can't do with RUM is capture screenshots and do that deep error analysis that you're not able to get from what the browser is able to provide to a JavaScript tag running in a browser. So you're able to do some really important deep dive work with synthetic, and so it fits that role. whereas RUM is really just keeping your finger on that heartbeat of all your users all over the world and how they're interacting with your site right now. RUM is also, once again, to emphasize that it's not limited by location, and that's an important qualification to make. So let's talk a bit about RUM and what it is and how it works. So typically, real user monitoring is employed using a JavaScript tag. This JavaScript snippet is usually really small. It generally captures performance metrics from browsers. And some RUM, but not all RUM providers, can also capture the business metrics and other details of what goes on with the user experience. A good RUM tool will also provide really good reporting and configuration capabilities, so you can do some analysis, trends over time. You can also do some reporting, which is really good, different visualizations of performance and business metrics alike, as well as near real-time alerting, and of course offering the ability to troubleshoot, to do deep dives, to identify issues and areas where improvements can be made, and the potential impact of making those improvements. The APIs and SDKs are offered by some real user monitoring providers, and these typically are designed to provide mobile application support, like SDKs for iOS and Android. They're also there to allow you to take data out of the RUM tool and use in your own custom reporting, or to send in information from disparate sources, back-end systems if you want, annotation, continuous integration, being able to see the impact of a particular build after you release it. These are all types of activities that can be done through APIs and SDKs. And not all RUM providers offer these, but if a really good RUM provider will offer both APIs and SDKs to their end users. So let's talk a little bit about the JavaScript tag. And for today, I'm going to use Boomerang as an example. The Boomerang library is an open source solution, and it is actively developed by Akamai. It is used by numerous companies, both for their own homegrown solutions and also by some RUM service providers as well. It is a small JavaScript snippet. It has the capabilities of capturing SPA, XHR, regular web requests, errors, and it really has broad support out there for the browsers that are out there in the world, as well as it has really an ease of implementation, because it's set up to do just that. So even when you're doing your own homegrown solution, you're going to have a very intelligible data set to work with that's well documented and defined. It also has a lot of developer activity, which makes it up to date and current. Let's talk a bit about how Boomerang in particular works. And now this flow would also be similar for other types of JavaScript tags that RUM providers may be using. So first, what you have is a user requests an impulse-enabled page. And at this point, it either goes, and in the graphic here, you'll see it's number 2 here. It talks about the edge server inserting the tag. And this is typically how we do it here at Akamai. But you could also the page could also already have the snippet in it because it's been added to the source code, or it could be inserted via an external third-party tag manager as well. But once that page comes back to the user with the tag on it, the impulse snippet runs in the background and it collects data. It collects data for performance, navigation, and a variety of other things. And it waits around in the background until that page onload event. After the page onload event occurs, then it sends what we call a beacon, or a package of data with all this metrics and timing data. And it sends it to an edge server who collects that data. And then that data is then forwarded on to the Impulse backend servers, which then go through and they store that data and they process it and aggregate it. This whole process of the requesting the page, and as soon as that page onload event happens, it's about 5 to 7 seconds later that that data is actually visible in the Impulse portal, as well as you could be firing alerts on it at that point. So it's definitely near real time. This is what you would typically see with a RUM solution. Not all of them are near real time, but that is what you would desire to be able to have accurate alerting, reporting, and really have that seamless experience for the end user, where the Impulse tag itself not impacting performance of the end user. Impulse offers very robust reporting and configuration capabilities. There's really a lot that we could go through and show here, but for sake of time, I'll just talk about a few things. Typically, what we're looking at is reporting on performance over time, being able to look at business metrics and the correlation to performance for those business metrics. So you can see the relationship between how fast a page loads and the user's response to that page. We even have the ability to capture things like rage clicks. So when you see a user's really upset and doing what I call mad clicker's disease, you'd be able to capture that too. Also, we have the ability to do some deep dive analysis. This particular dashboard you're looking at is that ability to drive down and see what's going on an individual resource level. This screenshot is of what we call our aggregate waterfall, which is pretty useful for this. All RUM solutions out there have to provide some sort of reporting and configuration. Otherwise, it's sort of pointless. And so what you want to look for is that ability to really meet your business needs in a RUM tool. You want to see that you're not just able to get a snapshot, but do trends over time and really be able to do whatever association of the data you want to and troubleshooting you need to do. APIs is another tool that, as I mentioned earlier, some RUM solutions will provide, and it's varied what they're going to be able to do. But typically, you're going to want to be able to analyze data from your RUM solution. Outside of it, maybe you want to use Splunk or some other tool to do some analysis or integrate it with maybe what you've already got in place. A lot of companies already have robust alerting dashboards and things like that in place, and being able to integrate that RUM data with what you already have is a very powerful option. But you also want to be able to send data to the RUM solution as well. For example, if you have maybe you have a customer service website, and the idea of that website is to minimize the number of calls to the customer service or number of emails, and have the customers be able to self-serve and get the answers they need without going beyond the pages on the website. If you had a back-end system that could then send an API call reporting the number of calls that are coming in a certain period of time, you could then correlate the number of calls coming into number of calls coming into your call center with the performance of your website at that time. And you could see how the slowly pages loading could impact the number of calls that are being received. And that's just one example. There's tons of other examples you could think of how back-end systems could then feed data into the RUM to make it a much more rich data set. You're also going to want to be able to do things such as I mentioned earlier, implement this with a continuous integration type scenario, where perhaps you're deploying changes to your website to a lower environment, like a staging environment, and you perhaps want to run a set number of manual tests that actually execute the browser and allow the Impulse tag to, or in this case, any RUM tag to execute. And then you'd want to be able to compare and contrast that performance after your latest deployment with what happened with the previous deployment. This would enable you to see if it is slowed down or sped up. So you could set up your red, green, yellow type alerts with, if it's, say 5% slower than it was before, then we're going to consider this a failure. You can likewise do this in upper environments such as your production environment, and you can see if this deployment has actually impacted your end users in a negative way. This could help you understand if there's an issue that you need to roll back sooner than later. Perhaps things that a functional test didn't even capture. So when is it a good scenario to use RUM? So anything really HTTPS is typically where you're going to see RUM functioning. So this would include pretty much all websites and applications that we commonly interact with. So that is really, it's really pretty broad. But outside of HTTP and HTTPS, it is not typically a scenario where users are interacting with the system. So this is pretty much the world we live in. You can apply RUM to, which is pretty broad. Who uses RUM? So there are a variety of people that can utilize real user monitoring data, and it goes way beyond what would be the first reaction most people would have. Most people would assume that the DevOps people would be the ones that would be most interested in it. But what we have found is that various individuals within cross-functional teams have gained great value from using RUM data. For example, in application owners, you may be talking about a digital marketing manager or director or perhaps a marketer, and they'll want to use RUM data to do their business analytics, to see how their users are using the site, perhaps even combine some marketing information in there and determine how a marketing campaign is impacting sales, and of course, how performance of those landing pages from that marketing campaign, how that performance is impacting the decision to do what they want to do on whatever that may be on the site. You also see people in engineering that find great use, people such as developers, front-end web developers, web development managers, the list goes on. And typically what they're going to do is they're going to be looking for analysis of the actual requests, whether that's a single page application request or a page view, looking at individual resources within that request, and analyzing the resources to determine if they're loading at the right time during the page load, if there's any opportunities to improve the page load by either omitting, delaying the execution of different third-party tags and so forth. And really, the other big one that engineering finds is it has a bleed over to what goes on with the application owners, where application owners are typically looking at that correlation between page performance and the decision of the users to do what you want them to do on your site. In other words, your business metrics. Engineering can also use that same information to prioritize their work. If they can identify with a good RUM tool which pages are impacting the decision of the customers to do what you want them to do, which pages performance is most impactful, so that they can focus their development efforts on the 2 or 3 pages that have the largest impact to the business's bottom line. They can also use it to do what-if type analysis. So a good RUM tool will provide you the capability to say, well, what if we sped this page up, or what if we sped up the downloading of this particular resource? What impact would that have on performance, and what impact would that performance then have on our bottom line? How much more money could we make? How many more people could we serve, et cetera? DevOps, people such as your cloud platform engineer or release manager, they're typically going to be interested in the alerting first and foremost, and the reporting, to be able to see their day-to-day activities, or when they do something to change the actual infrastructure configuration, or maybe configuration with the content delivery network or something like that. They're going to want to be able to see the impacts of those changes. And so they're really going to be interested primarily in reporting and alerting. In summary, the benefits of RUM is really all about capturing that real user experience. Not what you think is fast enough, but what really is fast enough. As an example, we've seen companies that have had a site performing well, and they decide to add new content to that site that it provides a much more rich and fulfilling experience for their customers. And that actually slowed down their site. But in reality, they saw a much higher conversion rate and a much higher revenue per user as a result of those changes, even though the site slowed down a bit. So really, you can't compare company A in a particular vertical with company B straight across the board and say, well, if company A's best page load time for their home page is 2 seconds, then that's the same thing for company B. Every company is going to have their own users that prefer their company. Their users are going to have their own tastes. And the way that you present your information, or in the case of e-commerce, we would say your product pricing and promotion, all of that plays into that user experience. And having the ability with real user monitoring to look at and investigate and see how that performance is impacting your users today, the way your website is being presented right now. And as their tastes change and as you change your site over time, that's really indispensable. So the real user experience cannot be overemphasized as extremely important in today's world. The real-time alerting is very powerful, allowing users throughout the business, as I mentioned before, particularly in DevOps. But real-time alerting will help you understand when things happen quickly, and so that you can take remediation activities. And of course, the analysis of performance, if we've talked about, and then that business metric analysis and correlation is also fantastic to have, and to be able to empower the various individuals in your organization to be able to really excel at their individual jobs. And as I mentioned before, it's very diverse what you can do with RUM data and how you can analyze it. So there's many needs it can fill. I'd like to, at this time, introduce Burton and John Boone in particular. So Burton has a very mature site, and they are working with some of the latest technologies and approaches to web performance. So I really found working with that very interesting and compelling. They're very focused on performance and are continuously looking for ways to see broader details of site performance from both a US and an international perspective. They've also got a dedicated crew, which is focused on performance, which is, I think, a real key to success for most businesses, is to have that group of individuals that are going to specialize in performance and really focus on that. Whenever you're distracted by a lot of different priorities, performance can sometimes fall by the wayside. John himself has been a pleasure to work with, he and his team. We've really enjoyed helping him and his team reach their goals, using Impulse in particular. He's very smart and astute, and he already knew really what he wanted whenever we first met him. So he already had very particular goals in mind of the end result he wanted to achieve whenever he was shopping around for a real user monitoring tool. And that was very helpful, because we were able to know clearly what was going to be meaningful to him and his team, and we were able to help him identify ways to address that with Impulse, and he's really just taken it from there. So without further ado, I will turn this over to John Boone.
Hi. So as mentioned, I'm John. I'm the web dev manager at Burton. So that means my area of responsibility here is basically all the web public-facing technology for our public site, burton.com. But firstly, about our company. So Burton Snowboards, we've been making gear for snowboarders and other people who love active mountain lifestyle things since 1977. We're based in Burlington, Vermont. We're family owned and run by the founders of the company, Jake and Donna Carpenter. Funnily enough, Burton is actually Jake's middle name when he started the company years ago. Most people don't know that, but people call him Jake Burton, and he will definitely answer to that, but it's actually not his last name. We make snowboards, boots, and bindings. We make goggles and helmets, a wide range of clothing, technical outerwear you can wear on mountaintops, casual wear you can wear in the city, a wide variety of stuff. We sell direct to customers through our online website, burton.com, but we also have a small network of Burton run or Burton affiliated stores in a number of cities around the world. It's a small network. We're definitely not a huge brick and mortar retailer, but we do have something to spread the word. And we run a global operation here. We sell all around the world. We have offices. Our European headquarters is in Innsbruck. We have an Asian headquarters in Tokyo. And then, as I said, we're based in Burlington, Vermont. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm definitely going to focus on, as Will mentioned, burton.com, our public-facing website. So it's our main brand site as well as our e-commerce platform. Unlike some people, we combine the two, and we tell our brand story in the same place that we entice people to follow through and participate by buying our stuff. We use Salesforce Commerce Cloud as an e-commerce platform. If you are not familiar with it, it's a hosted solution. So they run the data center, and all of the infrastructure is run by Salesforce. And we, on our dev team, write application code that we put on their infrastructure, and it runs. But what that means for us and for the purposes of monitoring is that we write a lot of application code and business logic, but we don't tune databases. We don't deal with networking and some of the more low-level infrastructure things. It's part of what we outsource. Our site has an international audience. We sell in 30 countries. United States and Canada is our biggest market, but there are 23 European countries. We sell in several Asian countries. Japan, snowboarding is actually huge in Japan, of all places. We do 3 languages, English, French, and German. We sell in 6 currencies now. And as far as countries, languages, and currencies, we have more of all 3 of those things planned. So there's a lot of expansion happening. The graphic on the right in the slide is just our homepage that you can see. But on the left, I wanted to talk a little bit about our user trend. So that's a year-over-year graph of our traffic for users by month. And it's Feb 1 to Feb 1, so you can see a couple of interesting things. I will say these are, we're in the, I didn't want to give specific numbers, but we're definitely in the hundreds of thousands of users over the course of the year. The one thing you can see from this graph is that we have very strong year-over-year growth. The peak on the previous year's Feb 1 is actually much lower than the next one. That's been pretty consistent. We've seen a lot of e-com growth. But the other thing you can see is that our traffic is pretty heavily seasonal. As a company that's got a lot of roots in wintertime, we have strong peaks around the sort of Thanksgiving, Black Friday period. And it declines a bit during the spring, but we have like many retailers, we're very dependent on Q4, and as someone with roots in snow, that's maybe even a bit more emphasized, although we do have a strong year-round business that we run as well. The only other thing I could say is, Will mentioned this, we run pretty much everything internally as far as development and sort of technology development. We have a team of 8 developers here who work for me. There are a number of other people in the company who also support the e-commerce operation, but that's the development crew. We do consult sometimes, but most of it we try to handle in-house. So, Burton's monitoring solution. So this is mostly as far as what we were looking for before we figured out what we were going to settle on. So we, for a long while, used Google Analytics, the free tier. We were getting good value out of it. We definitely got some insights from it and made some changes and had some good cycles of improvement with it. But we eventually got to a point where we kind of realized that Google Analytics is a great tool, but it's also not primarily a performance tool. It does a lot of things, but I wouldn't say performance is a primary mission with it. And we felt like we were ready to graduate to something where we wanted to really focus on performance. And I have a couple of use cases that I'll talk about in a few minutes that sort of show some of the origins of where that was coming from too. So we wanted to move on to something new. We realized after talking about it, we wanted something that was going to reflect our real users as they use the site. Because with our customer base being an active lifestyle company as we are, our customers are all over the place, as everyone's are, but we in particular want to make sure that we do a good job of reaching people when they're in hard to reach places. A lot of, snowboarding or active lifestyle things happens in the wilderness, and maybe you're on a really bad mobile connection, or maybe you have your old junky phone on the hike that you are not going to be afraid to drop in a river or something. So we wanted to really capture all those sort of edge casey people who might not account for huge traffic numbers, but who are also really the people who are most active, are probably our most important customers. So we wanted to make sure we had something that was very complete. And for that, synthetic was not going to give us that complete picture we wanted. It is I would not hate on synthetic at all. It's a great thing for being proactive about your solutions. You can find stuff up front and deal with stuff before your customers ever see them, and that is super valid. However, for us, we were looking for that complete picture, and we also were looking for something that was going to give us sort of a combination of big picture and granularity. We wanted something that was going to let us see some trends and aggregate data to be able to, get insights based on the overall picture. But we also wanted something that was going to help us if we did identify a performance issue or something we wanted to address, that we would be able to use this tool to drill into specific things and find as some granularity to troubleshoot individual things as we found them, which is not easy. Those are obviously, kind of opposite considerations. So we started the process of looking. We were already an Akamai customer, so they had a bit of a leg up there, but we did evaluate a number of solutions. And after thinking about it and talking through, we decided on a RUM monitoring tool as our best bet for the reasons I just mentioned. And then the way that the life cycle of it's worked here is it definitely started with our team, the web development group. And we wanted it in a very sort of practical way of we wanted to be able to evaluate our technical solutions as we did them and, put stuff out there and then be able to monitor their success against our user base. And then we also wanted to identify trouble spots as well. We had good success with that after we implemented, but interestingly, as Will alluded to, we had an interesting expansion of it to where now our e-commerce business stakeholders have become aware that this is a thing, and we've started we're building some simple dashboards that show them some of their prime KPIs so that they can tie some of their business objectives to some of ours, which in a perfect company, those two are going to be perfectly aligned. But as we all know, they fight sometimes. So we found that the RUM monitoring has actually served as a bit of a global sort of unifier for our different stakeholders and teams that do different things that are tied to development or tied to e-commerce. But it gives them a sort of a common language, common KPIs, common results, and everybody can talk about things in a way that's consistent and isn't anecdotal based on their sitting at their desktop, and B is shared in that way. It's also been interesting to educate people about different KPIs than the most common ones. Everybody focuses on a few in particular. Probably page load is the one that most people know in the company, but it's been nice to have a conversation with people around some of the other KPIs that are out there, like the difference between how much time it takes a backend server to process a request versus how much time it takes a user's computer to process the front end part. That obviously, business users are not going to go super far with that, but being able to at least have a basis for discussion has been very helpful. There's been, the more it seems people get a hold of some of this data, the more interested they are in it. And so I foresee this is eventually going to move into more senior leadership here. And we're going to try to have performance and these KPIs be part of our overall sort of digital strategy. So here's a quick, small screenshot of what we do. I will echo what Will says. Impulse has a great deal of power that we can talk about. Will and I have been talking about it for months and months now. We will continue to do so, but I thought I'd give just a short overview of some of the stuff we do. I alluded just now to some of the KPIs. We do look at, obviously, page load is a very important metric, but one thing that's been important for us that I'll talk a little bit in my use cases in a minute is the difference between, say, the back-end page time and the front-end page time. Basically, in the graph you see there, the green at the bottom is the time to first byte time, and then the lighter blue up above is the full page, the front-end time, and then together they constitute the full page load time. If you can, it's difficult to see, but there's also a purple sort of traffic indicator in there that shows, how the user counts are coming and going. And fortunately, we don't have much of a correlation between user traffic and performance spikes, so that's a good thing, first of all. We also, you can see, it's difficult to see, but some of the second row on the left is some timings related to interaction events. There is always an interesting distinction when talking to users about the page load metric. Sometimes will include asynchronous things, and so it could be very long, but time to interactive is an important metric, perceived performance, and being able to use some of the KPIs that Impulse provides as a way of talking about perceived performance with users, where, yes, to fully load every last byte that the page might need could be a certain number, but there could be a smaller number, or it could be available to the customer faster to actually do stuff. And so it gives the basis for that kind of discussion too. There's different ways to filter the data too. So we have a number of different filters we use. This view, I believe, is global, but you can filter by region. You can filter by whether it's a mobile user, desktop, or tablet. We filter by country. You can create custom ones. So we have some filters that correspond to certain backend containers that we use with Salesforce Commerce Cloud, so that we can see how, these backend containers, if those have the way we do things for one of them versus another affects performance for the user, even though they aren't aware of it, things like that. It does help a lot. The only other thing I was going to mention is we also use it we've been interested in the annotations. There's an annotations feature that Will mentioned. There's an API. It's been really nice to be able to tag. We are an agile shop, so we do regular code releases. And it's been really cool to be able to do a code release and then hit a annotation in here and be able to run a report and see, oh, we did a release here, no effect on performance, slight improvement in performance because we did, certain tickets. That's awesome. So I have a couple of use cases about ways that we've implemented Impulse and things that it's helped us with. The first I was going to say is about our Japan site. So as I mentioned, snowboarding is actually huge in Japan. So for a long time, we've run e-commerce in Japan for a while, but they were on their own e-com stack, which was actually in country there. And for a bunch of reasons, that was not optimal. It was nice that they had their own solution, but in terms of business consistency and operationally and stuff, there were a number of issues with that. So we wanted to bring them onto our main e-commerce solution. The rub was that our e-com solution is hosted on the USA East Coast, and we serve all our global solutions from there. So with that, it means that with our European and Japan operations, we incur the penalty of the speed of light. Obviously, it just takes longer to get stuff from a server across the ocean. And as we were scoping this project, our Japan stakeholders were very concerned about that. And we had a number of meetings. We talked about different ways to solve it, and we ended up going with the solution of staying with North America, but promising them that we were going to make performance a prime consideration during the project. So Impulse really helped us do that. We did the project, converted over to Commerce Cloud. Unfortunately, we were not able to have true apples to apples data. I really tried to get us to put Impulse on their old site for the last month of its life or something so we could get apples to apples, but it was one of the things that fell off the plan. So we didn't get straight comparisons, but we did use Impulse to monitor how things went very closely after the site went, and we found some actually very interesting things. It turned out that in some ways, our Japan site was actually faster than our USA site. And after investigating with Impulse, we learned that it had to do with how the teams were merchandising and communicating with customers. The North America team had contracted with a number of vendors that had third-party integrations that we happily put on the site, but that were actually slowing stuff down a lot on the front end. And the Japan team, for reasons of their own, had just fewer things like that, fewer third-party integrations, fewer calls to other domains and such. And so even though they had to, send stuff across the Pacific from where we were, they had a actually slightly faster site, which was not, I don't think, what anyone expected. So it's been a good conversation globally around the trade-off that Will mentioned about, what you choose to do for user interactions to provide a rich experience for people versus what you do to make it fast. My other use case is about a single page app that we have. So our category, like most e-commerce sites, we have a category page or view like you see on the left in here, and a product detail page on the right, like you'll see. So what we ended up doing, and we actually did this before we went with real user monitoring, was turn these two pages into one single page app that's built with the React JavaScript framework. So when we built it, we had looked at our traffic and it had determined that a lot of people were spending a lot of page views in this process. And we realized that really this is the money maker for the site. Obviously, that's no brilliant insight you're getting, but because of that fact, we wanted to take on a project to really optimize the flipping between them. So the upshot of all this is that when you look at the left, you can see along the left side, there's a color palette and then some other items. Those are filters, so you can click on different filters and get, if you're interested in only Gore-Tex jackets that are red, you can get that from that view. And then if you click on one of the tiles, you'll go to the page you see on the right, where it'll be the view of it. There's a whole bunch of nice interactive things, like when you click on a color swatch in the right, in the product detail view, it'll show you all new photography without having to reload the page, for example. So there's a lot of nice features we've gotten out of it, and from the user interaction, it's sweet. But we were really worried that, are our assumptions correct? That's hard to say. So we wanted to use Impulse to sort of validate that this was worth it. It is having a different technology stack. Taking on React it means extra work, and is it worth it? So we implemented Impulse and watched it very closely, and we actually did find that we got a lot of value of it. Tons of people, even more than we thought, were actually in the midst of this single page app and getting great value out of it. Almost 80% of our traffic ended up being in here. And we learned, because Impulse does a great job of showing the difference between hard SPA loads, where you load the full app, versus soft ones, where you're just changing a view or a module inside of it. We were getting great value out of it. Almost everybody was getting super fast page load times because of their SPA, and it was a really nice thing. It also nicely captures JavaScript errors. So there is a report in Impulse that shows JavaScript errors, and we can get real user problems. If somebody makes a call to dealer service and gives us a problem, we can go through and find their waterfall if we get some information from them. And we really want to troubleshoot individual things, we can. So choosing our RUM solution, when we were investigating. We had some requirements or needs or things that we were hoping for. We wanted to find something that was going to be easy to deploy. My team has giant backlog of stuff, like I'm sure all of yours do, and we did not want to add to it if we could. So we wanted something that was proven and mature, that because it's going to be on every page and we're relying on it to create mission critical data and make mission critical business decisions, it needed to be solid and it needed to be accurate and complete. And we really wanted to make sure we had something that we felt was 100%, solid. And part of that too, it needed to be performant. Obviously a performance monitoring tool that slows your site down is like worse than nothing. So those were all primary considerations. And Impulse really offered all these things and more. Real user monitoring has been a great thing for the company. Honestly, my main trouble is keeping up. The slide about the results is sort of a short list of them, but we've seen performance improvements for sure. We've found individual things that low-hanging fruit, you could call it. For example, I mentioned some of the third-party scripts. We were able to do some work. Some of them were possible to lazy load in a way that we weren't. And we saw some nice performance improvements with things that maybe we wouldn't have gotten to faster. We also learned some stuff that we didn't know. We like I say about the Japan site, where, we had an idea that the Japan site was just going to be slower, and, we're going to have to live with it. And we ended up learning more about how our customers interact with us because of this. It's been nice for visibility and transparency, and those things lead into the next one of data-driven decision-making. I mentioned the transparency we have across the company. People are aware of RUM now. People are aware of performance as a consideration. I have been using it as basically like the big sign that I carry around, like, hey, we're doing a project. How is this going to affect performance? Let's talk about what the KPI targets are. It's been nice to just have it become part of our process that I'm really trying to, and at Burton in general, is trying to, make performance something that is a continual effort. It's like product merchandising or SEO, that it's something that really is not like a project that you do, but it's almost like a practice that you work on, and it's never finished. You can always do better, and it changes according to day-to-day business needs. We've really gotten a lot out of it, and I would say it's been a great influence on the company in ways that I didn't expect. You get the basics, but we've actually gotten some cultural benefit out of it as well. So with that, I think that's what I got for how we've been doing, and I'm going to hand it back to Will V for some Q&A.
Thank you, John and Will, for the insightful presentation. And thank you to all the folks who submitted a bunch of questions. We will do our best to get through as many of them as possible, and we're going to get started with a few here. First question, isn't synthetic monitoring better in terms of being proactive? I believe that's a question for Will Smithee.
In terms of being proactive, I guess if you're looking from the perspective of trying to test something particular before an end user gets to it, yeah, I think that type of almost functional testing, or just seeing the impact of performance from a known set of criteria, because typically when you're running a synthetic test, it's going to be running on the same hardware and same network connectivity and all of that. Now, it won't represent how your users are going to experience it, but you could always use it as a benchmark before and after a change or something like that. Yeah, you can do that. But as I mentioned before, you can also do that with RUM. Really, for me, I find that RUM is superior in most all circumstances. The exceptions perhaps being, and in some ways RUM can do this, but I find that uptime reporting from different countries or geographies can be really done well with synthetic, as well as capturing error details, things that you just can't get from the browser. screenshots and things like that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Great, thank you, Will. This next question is also for you, Will. Any ability to collect events which happen after the onload or SPA actions?
Yes. So there's two ways to do that. So when you're talking about in a browser, the Boomerang tag after page onload can be configured to capture any XHR requests that you want after page onload, and then it'll send a discrete beacon for that. If it's a non-XHR request that you want to capture after page onload, then you would instead need to instrument your site. But that would be using like an API call where you could send in a timing or a metric or whatever you desire to Impulse on a case-by-case basis.
If I could jump in super quick, that's one thing that with our SPA, we've definitely talked about. We get I think it's based on the history API basically in the browser. So if the SPA writes to the history, then it'll just do it automatically. But we've talked about, and correct me if I'm wrong, Will S., but we've looked at instrumenting our site in even more detail than that for interaction events that we have and stuff too. There's a lot of capability there for sure.
No, you're spot on, John.
Cool.
Great, thank you for that, gentlemen. This next question is for John. What third parties slow down Burton US the most? Who should or what should we watch out for?
You're going to get me to name names. I don't know if I can or should do that. I will say they were tied to, I'm not going to give companies, but I'll give what they did. They were for customer service. It was a live chat application in particular, we learned is a big offender. There was also a number of, what was the one? They were basically pixels or third party. They were ad network pixels. The ad networks are one of those when you go with an ad network, they kind of farm it out. So there were some that were fine, and there were others that were off the charts. And so we were able to, get specifics and say, do you guys know the deal with this? But I'm afraid I can't get very specific. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable going that route in a public web.
Okay, John, thank you for that. The next question is also for you, John. Do you find any discrepancies between page load time and time to visually ready?
I don't think so. If I recall, for our site, those usually correlate. Time to interactive will vary at times, depending if we're like asynchronously loading images or something like that. But I think for our purposes, they mostly correlate.
And I'll jump in here too, John. I mean, for most sites, typically page onload is still a good indicator because it tracks fairly well with time to interactive or time to visually ready. However, that's not the case for all sites. And really what you're looking for when you look at these new metrics is the first thing you want to look for is that difference between those three timings, the time to visually ready, time to interactive, and then the time to first interaction. We've seen that the larger the gap between time to visually ready and the time to interactive, especially on mobile devices, can cause users great frustration. And we see that demonstrated a couple of ways. We see it by first off, we notice that the time to first interaction is happening before the page is actually interactive. So it's happening before the time to interactive. That's like your first red flag. And then beyond that, you can also capture, as I mentioned earlier, the rage clicks. And you can see how users are getting frustrated with the page.
Thank you for that. I guess this next question can be answered by both of you. What type of custom variables or dimensions can be used in RUM?
Maybe I could say, based on some of the ones that we use, would that be helpful?
Yeah.
I mentioned, so we use Salesforce Commerce Cloud. Inside of Commerce Cloud, there's what do you call it? I guess an object or a sort of container called a site, capital S, Commerce Cloud site. and it's like a logical grouping for functionality. And so we end up passing that value along so that in Impulse, you can run it as a filter and say, show me only my traffic from the Burton Europe Salesforce container. And for the most part, it doesn't change a lot of stuff, but there are certain configurations or specific things that are done at that level for us technically. So it lets us aggregate things according to a semi-arbitrary technical sort of container that we have, which is nice.
And I would just add to that there's a myriad of reasons you would add a custom dimension. The common ones would be things such as domain. For example, you might want to separate out your staging traffic or your QA environment traffic if you're running the same impulse tag on those environments from what's going on in production. That's very common. We also have ad campaigns, logged in or logged out, authenticated users or not. Those are also very common. And another real common use case for custom dimensions would be for doing A/B or ABC type testing. The best way to do that, of course, with A/B testing is to have a certain percentage of your end users using one version versus another version of your site or feature, as the case may be. And if you can identify that in the browser, we can then set a custom dimension to separate that traffic, and you can do side-by-side comparisons. So that's another very common use case for a custom dimension.
Great. Thank you for that. So with the interest of time, we are going to do one last question. For all the other questions that we didn't get a chance to answer today, we will follow up with each one of you after the presentation. So the last question here is, how is Impulse implemented into a SPA, single page app, for Akamai clients? Is it or can it be automatically injected at the edge node? I believe that's a question for Will.
Yes. In short, yes. The answer is yes. So as John said, typically we're going to use the history object in the browser. That's the default type of approach we use for implementing on a SPA. It can be injected like the regular tag is for all other scenarios from the edge if you want. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, that wraps up our Q&A session. And just a reminder, everyone, a quick 2-minute survey at the end for a chance to win your $100 Burton gift cards. And that is it for us today. Thank you very much.